Marie mentioned, I'm going to be hosting this webinar and walking you through it. Like Marie said, any questions can be placed down in the chat box. If they are pertinent to what I'm talking about during the presentation, I will address it then. If not, I will address all the questions that are not pertinent to what I'm talking about at the end of the webinar. That being said, this is an introductory level webinar for people that are very new to TI Portal, those that are really just getting their feet wet, haven't really built a project in it before, or maybe just haven't really done it to the full extent. Since this is 30 to 45 minutes, my hopes was to do 30 minutes for the actual presentation, for the last 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to be covering a lot of information in the first 30 minutes. Try to keep up with me if you can. If you get lost at some point, like I said, just feel free to address that in a question. So we're working with TI Portal version 16 because this is the newest version of TI Portal. It came out earlier this year. Once you have it downloaded onto your computer, it would appear like this icon. And when you double click and open it, this is the view that it brings you to. This is known as the portal view. So when you open up a project, this is what you'll see. If you had previously opened projects, you can quickly open them here from this buffer. Right now, I have cleared those all out, so it looks a little bit more clean. But if you're also starting a new project, you can come down and you can create a new project. As you saw in the flyer that we sent you, we're going to be building a project with some basic components from Siemens. So I'm going to create a project first and foremost. We'll just call it a webinar project. You'll see that it gives me the option to define the path at which I'm going to store this, as well as other information if I want to have some associated information along with that. So we're going to create a project. Now, I primarily use Portal View to create projects or to open previously used projects. Other than that, more often than not, I often switch over to the project view, which is probably most familiar to most of you. And I'm going to be working mostly in the project view, which I'll show you shortly. So I'm creating a project now. You can see that it is creating the project to the specified path on your computer. I named it webinar project, so that's where it's being stored. Every file extension for TI Portal is .ap and then the corresponding version. So in this case, .ap16. I'll talk a little bit towards the end of the presentation about zipped project files and then the associated project extension for zipped projects. This is taking a little long for some reason, but this is not usual, it's not typical. In the meantime, I'll give some background on myself. I started applied about year and a half ago. I got certified in low voltage Dynamics G drives, as well as factory automation. So I deal primarily with PLCs, HMIs, drives, anything underneath the realm in terms of Siemens automation. We also sell other products as well. And if they're related to automation, I also support them. So once the project is created, you'll see that this view kind of changes dynamically based on the fact that project is now open. And you'll see here, if I really wanted to, I can go through this ladder of sequential steps to build a project, and actually it'll walk me through it and help you guide you through that process. Since we're starting a new project, we're going to configure a device first and foremost. So right now, there's no devices in our project, so we can't see anything, but we're going to add a new device. We're going to be dealing primarily with the S7-1200. For those of you that do not know, this is the baseline PLC that Siemens offers, and it comes in a whole sort and variety of flavors. There are also the S7-1500. We're not going to be building this in the project today, but this is more or less the flagship CPU that Siemens is selling. Both the 1200 and the 1500 come in a standard or a safety variation, which I'll explain shortly. You'll see here that in TI Portal, you can also you can use older CPUs like the S7300, the S7400, or the remote I/O PLCs that exist in the Siemens automation portfolio. So with that being said, we're going to start with the S7-1200. It is the block compact size CPU that has local I/O built onto it. You'll see here it goes from the 1211 all the way up to the 1217, and then there's the yellow variation that stands for safety. There are also Psi Plus CPUs, which essentially have a conformal coating on all internal electronics. This just gives them the ability to survive a higher threshold in terms of temperature, vibration, and shock, so on and so forth. It just essentially makes the components a little bit more durable. Next to each S7-1200 denotion, you'll see that there are acronyms associated with that PLC. The first being what the PLC is powered on, the second being the inputs, and then the third being the outputs. So in this case, this would be a 120 volt AC powered PLC with 24 volt DC inputs and relay outputs. And then you can guess from here on out that this is a 24 volt DC powered PLC, 24 volt DC inputs, 24 volt DC outputs. And we are going to go with the high-end S7-1200s, the 1217C DC. So we select it. You'll see here that it tells you a lot of information regarding this PLC. It even gives you the option to choose the firmware version if you have an older PLC of an older firmware version. In this case, we're going to start with the newest. Version 4.4 is the newest version, firmware version for the S7-1200. You'll notice that when I added this to the project, it says open device view here, and when that box is checked, it's actually going to pull you out of the portal view into the project view. And you can also go to the project view by clicking this button down here on the left if you didn't add a device to the project just yet. I'll show you how you can add a device here, or you can add a device in the project view once we get there. Since this is taking a little bit to load, I'm not sure if it's because I have multiple applications open, but the 1211, the difference between the 1211 up to the 1217 is the amount of local I/O that you can store on the rack with the PLC, as well as different sizes in load and work memory. So you'll see that when I added the PLC to the project, there populated the PLC in what's called the project tree. So we are now in the project view. For those of you that did not notice, down here in the bottom left, I can go back to the portal view and it'll bring me back to where I was. Like I said, I kind of live in this area. This is where most people tend to live when it comes to TI portal. So here's where all your devices that are in your project would be stored, as well as some other configurable options. This is what's called the working area, the main area. You'll notice that with TI portal, depending on what I click on, the areas around it will dynamically change to what I'm focusing on. So in this specific instance, we are in the PLC device view. And if I go to the properties here for this PLC, you'll see under general that it gives me all the associated properties for the device that I'm looking at. If I were to click off of this, you'll see that it disappears because I'm no longer focusing on that object. So here's the main view. This is called the inspector window. This here on the right-hand side is called the hardware catalog now, because we're dealing with adding devices onto our PLC rack. But if it was something else, like a programming environment, this would have like PLC operations, so on and so forth. So with that being said, we're going to select the PLC under properties, general, in the inspector window. This is where you'd set up all of the properties for your PLC, general information, the actual description and the part number, what the current firmware is that's set up in the project. You can set up some local identification and maintenance information if you needed to. This is where you would choose your Ethernet addresses, which you'd set up here. If you had a network, you can come here and select a subnet that you want this PLC to be connected to. We'll do that actually now. That way you'll see what happens when I add the subnet. So right now we're on the device view, we're focused on the PLC. Up here on the top, I'm gonna go over the network view real quick to show you what I'm talking about. You'll see right now the PLC exists in our project, but there's nothing, there's no subnet, there's no other devices that are able to connect to that subnet. So in the device view, under the PLC properties, like I was just showing you, we're gonna add a new subnet, and you'll see now that a subnet has been created. And if I were to go back to the network view, it would populate underneath the PLC, which I'll show you when we go back to the network view. Essentially, this area is where you'd configure all your properties for your PLC. Your Profinet device name, which is very specific to Profinet, can also be set here. You have the option to configure your inputs and outputs, as well as your analog inputs and outputs. If you had high-speed counters for encoders or other devices that are inputting at a high frequency, you could do that. With the outputs, there's pulse train output as well as pulse width modulation. There's different startup cycles you can do. In this case, when you power it off, it's called a warm restart, so it'll automatically boot into run. There's other options. You can have it boot into stop if you wanted to and you don't want the machine to just start up. There's a whole bunch of properties here that you can really go through. There's a web server for the PLCs. So if you were to turn this on and then specify some user management, you could essentially, once the IP address is set, go to a web browser, type in the IP address, and it'll pull up a whole bunch of information associated with that PLC. There's a watch table you can set up for the web server, which would be in a place where you specify tags, and you can monitor those tags from the web page. You can set up a custom HTML page if someone at your facility knows how to do that, as well as a whole plethora of other information that's available from the web page. Protection and security, if you wanted to add a level of security to your PLC so that only certain people can access it that have a password, you could do that. As of more recent, the S7-1200s are now OPC-UA capable, so they can act as an OPC-UA server. That's essentially the main gist of all the properties. In a more advanced, longer webinar, I would cover more of these in specific. So we have our PLC in our project. We want to add modules to the actual PLC rack. So you'll see here, I have my PLC. To the right of the S7-1200 in this view is where you'd put all your signal modules, I/O, analog, digital, and to the left is where you'd put all your communication modules. So you may be thinking, where do I add these modules? Well, here on the right-hand side, we have the hardware catalog. If you wanted to, you can change to a different PLC if you choose the first one incorrectly. You can come down here, and we're just going to add in a bunch of different modules to show you how easy it is to do in TIA Portal. Say we're adding 8 times 24 volt DC inputs. So you can select it. It'll give you some information down here in this information tab regarding that device. And now you can either drag the device in, or you can double click it, and TIA Portal will intuitively place it in the next slot available. So there's digital inputs. You'll see that there's fail-safe digital inputs. For Siemens, fail-safe I/O requires a fail-safe PLC. So keep that in mind. We're not dealing with a fail-safe PLC right now, so we're just adding standard inputs and outputs. I'll add a digital input and output card just to show you that there's different variations of these signal modules if you choose to use them. Communication modules. Like I said, to the right of the S7-1200, we have I/O. To the left of it, we have all of our signal and communication modules. So if I wanted to add on additional Ethernet ports or like a wireless card, you can do that. If I wanted to add on a Profibus connection to this PLC to connect it to older devices using serial, I could do that. There's also the option to add other point-to-point modules for different serial communication protocols. So RS-232, RS-485, RS-422, 485. And I'll add one in just to show you that it does populate it to the left. There are an identification system that can be used with the S7-1200s for RFID. So there is an RFID module. There's also a AS interface if you decide to use that, or have sensors that would utilize that. With the S7-1200, there are also technology modules. So you can add a weighing module onto your rack. I'll do so now. If you had a load cell that you wanted to wire in, or multiple load cells, as well as the option for an I/O link master and some other options as well. I'll add another Profibus module in just because why not? So say this was the completed rack for our PLC, and we're done building this, and we wanted to add remote I/O that was not centralized to the main cabinet. We would come over here to the network view, and like I had done in the PLC properties, I had specified a subnet, so now that exists within our project. And you can see that the PLC also has the other communication modules available for, like, for example, in this case, you can see that this is a Profibus. If I wanted to create a Profibus network, I could do that. So you do all of your networking from the network view. So like I said, we have a main PLC, it's in our main cabinet. Say we had a cabinet that was located somewhere peripherally from the PLC, and we wanted to add some I/O there. We don't necessarily need a PLC there. We can come in here into the hardware catalog, and we want to add in some distributed I/O. So there's a whole plethora of remote I/O that Siemens offers, from the ET200SP, which is the most popular, to the ET200MP, which is more or less like the S7-1500 form factor, as well as a whole plethora of different options that might come with like M8 or M12 connections rather than wiring straight wires. So in this specific instance, we are going to add on a remote I/O rack with the ET200SP, which is probably the most popular nowadays. And we're just going to choose some interface module here that speaks Profinet. We'll go with this guy just for an example. Same situation here as in the device view. You can either drag or drop this into the project, or you can double click it. And you'll see that when this happens, it's going to pull it into our project. Just give it a sec. And when I pull it in, you'll see that it knows it's not assigned to a specific subnet yet. So there's two different ways that you can connect this to your network. You can either click it here and it'll show all the available subnets, or I can click on this little green box and drag it over and connect it to the subnet that is pre-existing. So great. The devices are networked, but we did not add anything to the remote I/O rack yet. So I'm going to open up and kind of give you a walk through what's going on here. So we have our interface module that connects you to the subnet. There are interface modules available that speak Profibus if you have that. But you'll see here, the hardware catalog has changed again. So when we were in the network view, it showed all the devices that we can add, and they were PLCs, HMIs, drives, networking components, so on and so forth. But in the device view now, I have all these modules that are specific to this ET200SP. So same situation here. You can come in, you can double click and add a device, or you can drag and drop it. You'll see that there's a whole plethora of digital input options as well as digital outputs. Same with analog and inputs and outputs, as well as COM modules, and some other available options. You could add a motor starter onto an ET200SP rack if you have a motor out remotely from the main cabinet. So we'll add in some more analog modules, and I'll kind of give you a breakdown of what's going on here with the backplane module. So you'll notice as I populate this rack that the base module, which essentially these little cards here plug into, has different color coordinations. So the white module specifies a new potential group. So in this specific instance, you would wire in 24-volt DC into this module, and then the modules that follow would source power from that base module. So you can do up to 8 amps per potential group for this ET200SP. And if you were building it, it would actually even tell you if it thought that the modules were going to go over 8 amps. So say, for example, these first two modules occupy 8 amps, so they require 8 amps of power of current. And we wanted to create a new potential group to satisfy the next 8 amps that were going to be used. You'd come in here and you select the module, and you'll see here that this changed to the properties of this module. I can enable a new potential group, and it'll change the base module to the correct version. And when you are setting up these ET200SP, it needs to match exactly what you have on the rack. So just so you know, that is there as an option. So this isn't a lot of I/O, but we'll pretend like this is all we need for this specific instance. We come back here to the network view. I'll show you something nifty here. If you come up here to the top of the network view and click on this little eyeball, it'll actually show you the IP address of the devices that are existing in your network. So let's say we have this remote rack, and we're going to have the same exact setup in 3 different locations, so we can use the same hardware. Rather than having to build each one over again, you can really just come here, copy, and you can paste. And I'll Control V this, and I'll paste it again. And you'll see, as of right now, they occupy the same IP address. But when I bring it into the network, it's going to say, hey, Corey, this is not right. We need a new IP address. We cannot have conflicting IP addresses in a Ethernet network. So it's going to populate the next IP address for you, and as well as the last module. So in that instance, in a matter of a couple clicks, I was able to recreate this remote I/O rack without really having to do that much work. So that's pretty darn helpful in terms of, if you have a setup that requires multiple instances of the same hardware setup, then you can just build it once and then copy and paste, and you have yourself your network. So we added in our PLC, we added in our remote I/O. Now we're going to add an HMI because more often than not, a application requires it. So I can either come over here to the right side and specify an HMI, or I can do it this way, and I can come over here and add a new device over here in the project tree. So I'm going to add a new device. It's very similar to what the project or the portal view had shown us at the beginning of the webinar. So we're going to select the HMIs. We have the basic panels. I'll explain the licensing at the end for all this stuff, but we have the basic panels, comfort panels, the comfort mobile panels, as well as the Psi Plus HMIs, which are the conformally coded variants of these panels. We're going to be dealing with a comfort panel today, so I'm just going to choose a TP700, so it's a 7-inch touch panel. You'll notice that there are other variations of this comfort panel. The Inox PCT are essentially explosion proof. They're stainless steel. They reach like an ATEX 2-22 rating, as well as an IP69K, I believe, rating. There's also the ability to configure this panel in portrait mode if you have it sitting vertically rather than horizontally. And there's also outdoor variations which reach a higher IP rating than the standard panels. So we're going to add this panel in. Same situation here. It asks for its firmware version. If you had an older version, you could specify that, and it also gives you information regarding that panel. And you'll notice here on the bottom left, there's something different than what the PLC showed. It's going to ask you to start the device wizard. You could choose not to if you want to. You'll see why we most often tell people to do it, because it just makes your life a little bit easier. So we're adding the HMI to our project right now, and it's going to pull up a device wizard. This is just a way for you to configure HMI in the instance that you already have an idea, a plan for what the HMI screen paths will be, as well as some other properties that are associated with that panel. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about in a second. So it pops up. You'll see it immediately brings you to the PLC connections. Here's our HMI, but it needs a PLC to speak with. It needs a master PLC to send and receive information from. So it automatically shows us the PLC we have in our project, and we're going to select that. And you'll see that it knows to create the connection automatically. We're going to go to the next tab. Here, if you wanted to specify a different background color and you wanted to change some of the preset functions that already exist on your screens, you could do that, like the date or time. If you had a company logo that you wanted to add, you can browse for it and add it. This screen essentially, this would be called your global screen. This is where you can essentially define the windows for your alarms. If you decide you didn't want to have unacknowledged alarms, or you didn't want to have a certain type of alarm populate here, you can change that if you wanted to. This is where I was talking about the screen paths being preset. So if you had a plan for what your screens are going to be, you can come here, and it would usually start like this, where you just have the root screen, your home screen, and you can click on the plus sign and it'll add another screen. So in this case, I'll name it status. And the way this is set up, on our root screen, there'll be a button called status, and that'll take us to the status screen. Now say we want to have two buttons on our home screen, one for status and then one for properties. In this specific instance now, we would have the properties button and as well as the status button appear on the home screen. That way you can select either one. And then you can go on, if you had a whole path for different screens you wanted to create, you can just do that. And TI Portal will automatically create those screens and those paths for you. So that's pretty powerful if you have an idea of what your screens will be. System screens, you'll see that Siemens gives you the option to set up a bunch of pre-made screens that Siemens offers. You can see here for yourself, you can read them, system settings, user admin, more system information, all these other configurable options. You can choose to add them all, or you can choose to remove them all, depending on your situation. Last but not least, in the wizard, it gives you the option to add what's called system buttons. This is a little area that'll appear on all your screens no matter what. So this is alarm windows. This will take you to your home screen. This will change your languages. This is system admin, and then this is to exit the runtime if you wanted to go to the operating system of the panel. So now that we completed the HMI wizard, we click Finish, and it'll save the settings, and it'll bring the HMI into the project. So because we specified the network connection in the wizard earlier, it'll automatically create the connection in the network view, which you'll see in a second. I should have showed you that. It was going to pull this up first and foremost, but you'll see here that this is the home screen. Because I specified these other screens, they're already here. This is just proof of the pudding. This is showing you that it sets up the screen path automatically based on what you put in the wizard. So here in the network view, you can see now that I didn't even have to specify it outside of the wizard. The wizard already took care of it. It already networked the device into my project, and it allocated the next available IP address and the subnet to that device. Because this is basic and a very introductory level webinar, we're not going to be going through screen building. That could be a topic for another time. I just wanted to show you how easy it is to pull that device in. And the same goes to drives as well. From the same area, add new device. You can come in here and you can add in a drive if you had one in your setup. So there's the G110M. This is the motor-mounted VFDs. The G120 is the modular VFD where you have the control unit, the power module, and then if you had the little IOP device for the top, you can add that on. The G120C is the compact version, so it's a all-in-one system. You don't have to specify the presets for the power modules and control units are set up with these G120s automatically. And you'll see here there's a bunch of other different options. These are distributed drives, peripheral, just some other variations of the VFD, sometimes with larger requirements and horsepower. So in this project, we're just going to be adding in a basic G120C. You'll see it automatically gives you, and it breaks them down. In this case, this is three-phase AC, 380 to 480 volts. Different communication protocols. In this case, we're using Profinet. Frame size is depending on the power that's going to be required by your drive. So in this case, it doesn't really matter. We'll just choose something because I just want to show you how easy it is to pull this into your project. We'll just go with this 1.1 kilowatts. Same situation as the PLC and the HMI. It asks you to specify a firmware version, and it gives you a bunch of relative information to that device. So it's going to pull the device in a second. Where did it go? So something weird just happened. You'll notice that it did not pull the device into the project. Do that again. Might be a bug with my start drive. We weren't going to be going in depth about commissioning and parameterizing the drives because this is a short webinar, but that is a topic for a later webinar where it would be more appropriate. Essentially, this would just, it should have pulled in the device. It should have brought up the device view where I can start to parameterize or commission the drive. And then it would also give me the option to network it. I think I'm having an issue with my start drive, which is not pulling in the device, but it's not like we were doing anything more in depth with that device. It was just a matter of me showing you that you can pull it into the project and network it. So in this instance, you would have your PLC, you have your 3 remote I/O set up, you have your HMI, you'd have your drive. And for most people, that would probably be a decent setup. You know, those are all Siemens devices. So that's very appropriate for a lot of people that are using Siemens devices. But say you didn't have a Siemens device and you wanted to add that to your project. Well, it's not going to automatically appear in your hardware catalog because it is not native as a Siemens device. So if you had something else that spoke Profinet or Profibus, what you would do is you'd go to the vendor, whomever it may be, I'll use Cognex as an example because that's the GSD I'll be pulling in today. You'd go to their website, or in this case, you'd go to their software, and there's a way to extract the GSD from their software. And then what you do is, in Portal, you'd come up here to Options. You go to Manage General Station Description Files. And from here, it'll actually ask you for a path. So you'll point to the file where your GSDs are stored. For those of you that don't know what a GSD is, it is a General Station Description File. It essentially establishes comms between the PLC and the other device that you're using in your project. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking for the GSDs for the Cognex cameras that I want to add. So Cognex GSDs, we select this folder. You'll see that you don't see it here, but when you select the folder, it'll show you all the GSDs that are inside. And in this case, you would just click install, select this and then install, and then it would pull it into your hardware catalog. But I already have them installed, so I don't need to do that. But just to show you that they are there, we'll go to Profinet.io, sensors, and now I have all of these Cognex cameras if I wanted to add them in to my project. And you'll see here, if you had different GSD versions for different versions of the device you're looking at, then that's where you would change the version for the appropriate device you're using. And I'll just show you that you can pull it into the project and network it just like any other device. So that essentially covers the gist of what this webinar is. I will show you two last things before we start to field some questions here from you all, because I think we're actually already over the time. So what would you do once you have a project that's completed? Well, first off, you'd save it. So you save it on your computer and you won't lose your changes. But if you wanted to send it to somebody and you didn't want anything to get corrupt, you wanted to have everything stay within your project, what you'd do is you come up here to Project and you'd come down here to Archive. And it asks you for the source of the project you want to archive and the destination you want to store it in. So in this case, I will put it to the desktop, make it a little bit easier so we can just find it quickly. I'll archive it there. Oh, okay. I should have chose a different path. I'll show you why that failed. I did not have a folder specified. I'll just say archive. So archive. Come back here, archive. We will choose archive folder and select. And now it's going to archive our project to that folder that I just specified. So this is much better, and you'll see now also. I don't know if it'll show it, but like I said earlier in the webinar, this takes the project extension .zap rather than .ap16. So this is very important because if I just went to my source file, not my archive file, so if I went to my source file, which actually I think I just put right here. Let me show you. Sorry, it's taking a second here. Here. So this is my source file. I archived my whole project here. If I just took this here, this .ap16 file, and sent it to somebody that wanted to open it, it'd be missing all of these additional files. So archiving is very important because when you archive it, it grabs all of this and puts it into one file that you can send to your customer or whomever may be looking at it. And if you were to open an archived file, I'll close this just to show you. Might take a second. So in version 16, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a difference in terms of what the options are here. In any of the older versions, there would be another option above archive called retrieve. That's what you would use in any older version of TI Portal to open an archived file. But in version 16, they finally got rid of that to kind of alleviate the confusion. And now the open function here, this works for normal projects as well as archive projects. So you can just come and find the archive project here, and you can open it here. And you'll also see that my original project is here as another option. So I can open my archive project. It'll ask me to specify a project folder. It's going to say, hey, there's one that already exists if I had it stored there, and it's going to open my archive project. So that's a very important thing that I wanted to show everybody here, because some people don't realize when they just send the project file, not the zipped one, that they're not sending a bunch of the peripheral information that is associated with that file. So that might give you issues when you're opening it or if you're migrating a project, etc. The last thing I want to talk about, for those of you that don't know, is licensing for our devices. I'm only going to really talk about the controllers and the HMIs. So we talked about the S7-1200 today. Primarily, if you were working with just the standard S7-1200, the licensing you would need is just Step 7 Basic, in this case version 16. So with Siemens, the software you can download anywhere, but you cannot use it, or you cannot use different layers of that software until you get it appropriately licensed. So if you're programming a S7-1200, a standard S7-1200, you need Step 7 Basic. And if you're in version 16, it'd be Step 7 Basic version 16. If you're programming a safety S7-1200, you don't only need the Step 7 Basic, but you also need the Safety Basic licensing. And then anything above that, if you're dealing with the distributed controllers or the advanced controllers for PC-based open controllers, and they're all standard, you would just need the Step 7 Professional. So theoretically, let's say that you had an S7-1500 and a normal S7-1500. You would only need the Step 7 Professional license. And that would cover any of the devices underneath that canvas. So you wouldn't need a basic license as well to program S7-1200s, because you have a Step 7 Professional license that is superseding that. It is of higher value, and it automatically covers the S7-1200. Another thing to note with our licensing is, say, for example, you had a Step 7 Professional version 16 license. You can program an S7-1500 in version 16. That version 16 Professional license would work with any previous version of TI Portal. So you can download version 13 if you had a 1500 in a project in version 13 and you didn't want to change it. And you can just go on the Siemens support site, download version 13, and that license, Step 7 Professional version 16, would work for version 13. If that's not clear to everybody, just please say something once we get to the questions. If you had a safety version of the S7-1500, that's when you need to add in Safety Advanced. So just so you know, basic controllers just require the basic license. Advanced controllers just require the advanced license. But as soon as you make either one of those safety, it requires an additional license. The other thing I wanted to talk about was HMI panels. So with any Step 7 license, either be basic or advanced, it always comes with the WinCC basic license. So you can program a basic panel, a WinCC basic panel, as long as you have a Step 7 license of some sort. But let's say you don't have a Step 7 license at all. Then, and this is a weird predicament, but if you didn't have a Step 7 license at all, but you wanted to program a basic panel for some reason, then you'd have to get a WinCC basic license. If you're dealing with anything above a basic panel, you'll definitely need a license regardless of what Step 7 license you have. So comfort panels or mobile panels require a WinCC comfort license. If you have a PC-based panel, or you just had like some computer with a monitor that you wanted to display a runtime on, that's when you need the WinCC Advanced engineering license as well as WinCC Advanced runtime license. And in SCADA, it's the same situation. If you're having multiple devices on top of this network, and one of them acts as a SCADA device, you would need the appropriate WinCC professional licensing for that SCADA level HMI. So I wanted to cover these because a lot of people reach out to us. For those of you who don't know, Juliet, myself, and Steven are always fielding questions from our customers. And more often than not, a lot of people are not entirely sure of how the licensing works with Siemens. So I figured it would be very beneficial to kind of walk through that. And I know that it was quick, so I'm very happy to kind of walk through any questions regarding licensing if you have any. But at this point, we're not going to be going anything more in depth with TI Portal. That'll be for a later, longer webinar, most likely. We'll probably see how the feedback is for this first one. But I also want to cover the licensing because I feel like that is something that's very pertinent and a lot of people come to us with questions about. So at this point, If any of you have questions regarding anything I covered today, or things that might be related, I'd be happy to field them. I think Juliet might even read them off to me. If I look at the conversation here. Right, Pamela, you're probably right. It probably was because my screen was sharing. It was taking so long. Can the PLC rack be multi-homed with a second Ethernet card? Dan, can the PLC rack be multi-homed with a second Ethernet card? Dan, could you clarify that question? I'm not entirely sure what multi-homed means. You can unmute yourself as well if you want.
Yeah, it's going to be easier than typing it in. So if you want two separate networks, one to have basically peer-to-peer communication, or a separate subnet that reaches out to a non-Siemens device sharing data on some other protocol, we wanted that to be isolated and secure,
right?
As opposed to the maybe the network, the subnet that communicates with your HMIs.
Yes, absolutely. You can specify a separate subnet with those additional communication cards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that a relatively new feature, or we were under the impression you couldn't?
No, that's been a feature. It just depends on the setup. So like if you have a setup just like the S7-1200 alone,
yep.
It's not going to allow you to do that. If you add an Ethernet card onto it, though, it should let you do that. I'm going to try it right now. So like in this case, the S7-1200, you can only have one subnet local on the card on the PLC. The S7-1500, that gives you the option to have two different IP addresses built onto the same device. So if you're not looking to add a communication card onto the device's rack, the S7-1500 does offer that as a standard feature for some of the higher level controllers that have additional IP addresses for Ethernet. So add new subnet. So yeah, if you have an S7-1200, you would just need to add an Ethernet card onto that, and then that'll allow you to add a new subnet on.
Okay, great.
Does anyone have any other questions? If you don't have questions now, and you're just trying to let things settle a little bit in your head, here's our contact information. I am Corey Rinaldi. Here's my email address for Applied, and this is my phone number. Juliet Sardin, who's also up on the screen right now, I think. She is also another automation specialist. Here's her contact information. We cover the entire automation portfolio at Applied. Here's someone's mic went high.
So Pamela does have a question. She's asking if we're available for consulting about new institutional lab setups.
If you're just talking about a new application where you're looking for someone to source the components from, as well as to get some technical advice on what the best setup would be in Siemens, we can certainly do that. We are not integrators. We only have 3 automation specialists, and the amount of questions that we're getting day in, day out and requests, it kind of takes up most of our time. So it's difficult for us to actually facilitate the programming and the panel building, but we do have a bunch of other companies that we work with to source that type of work too. So we work with third-party integrators and panel shops that would handle the later end of things, the back end of things, I guess. But we are more than available and willing to help take a look at what you're working with and provide a best setup or a best fit for what your solution is. So yeah, we're absolutely open to talking about that in our session.
Are you talking about a lab like a training lab, or are you talking about a starter kit? What exactly are you looking at for a lab setup?
Yeah, a training lab. So you're just looking for a bunch of Siemens devices that you could have in front of your students, so they can play around with our Siemens devices and become familiar with automation and programming and screen building, so on and so forth. I'm assuming. Yeah.
If that's the case, Siemens has that Siemens cooperates with education, right? That CSE. Juliet and Corey, are you familiar with that?
I'm actually not very familiar with that.
Yeah, there's something you can send to her. It's like labs where you can buy for one price you get 10 PLCs, 10 HMIs. It's kind of kits for training and colleges, technical schools, that type of thing. So if that's what she's looking for, there is some additional information you can get her for that.
Okay.
Hi, Pamela. This is Marie Martin. I'll contact you and I can hook you up with the appropriate division or a person with Siemens who can help you with that.
Yeah, if to follow off of what Troy and Marie said, if it's not something you want where you want to get if it is something where you want to get 10 plus PLCs, HMIs, or whatever, then absolutely go the Siemens route, and I'm sure that probably be the best route for you through that program. If it's just a one-off thing where you want just one setup for everybody to use here and there, then that's something we've done in the past for our customers too. So I'm sure we can speak further about what the expectations would be on that, and the level of involvement and the amount of equipment you would need. But yeah, absolutely, we can talk about it. Thanks for your question, Pamela. Any other questions while you have us all here at the same time?
All in one room.
I know, it's rare you get everybody replied. Yeah, exactly. Well, if there's not going to be any other questions, like I said, here's our contact information. If you have questions regarding Siemens PLCs, HMIs, networking components, we'd be more than happy to help you out.
And again, this webinar is being recorded, so I'll be sending it out, shortly.
Yes, thank you for that, Marie.
You're welcome. Thanks, Corey.
Anytime. Well, we're going to end it then. If there's no more questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you for attending today. And if you have any good feedback, that would be great to hear as well. All right. Until next time, keep an eye out, I guess, and we'll be working on getting together another webinar for the future. All right. Everybody have a great day.